From this video we will learn when reptilians came to Earth, and what is their strategy for conquering a planet or civilization. What is the role of reptilians in God's creation? We will learn about the war from 100,000 years ago, that took place between various extraterrestrial civilizations. This war that took place near and in the atmosphere of our planet and what happened within the Galactic Alliance at that time. We will also find out why aliens decided to build pyramids in many locations on Earth, as well as other interesting things. The fragments I will read are from the book The Forgotten Genesis written by Radu Cinamar. Let's get started. The period about 100,000 years ago was very dark for mankind, as it involved a devastating conflict between many of the alien civilizations then existing on Earth. I would even go so far as to say that was the most terrible confrontation I have ever seen, in relation to Earth, but it was entirely alien in origin. All of the warring parties were extraterrestrial and were disputing territory or power of influence. It was a very difficult time, a breakup period, because many civilizations broke away from the Galactic Alliance they had joined. Due to the highly advanced technologies and the nature of the weaponry used, life on the planet's surface has suffered greatly, and in some areas, which are now underwater, has been completely eradicated. I have seen terrible images of this conflict, which took place both in the Earth's atmosphere and outside it, in outer space. I was struck at the time by the fact that the intensity of the fighting was so great, that a significant part of the planet's sky as seen from the ground was almost red. The clashes were of an unprecedented severity. Huge explosions left enormous debris on the Earth's surface. I also saw how they later extracted that debris, by sort of crumbling it and then absorbing it into giant ships, like containers. In my mind, at the time I called them garbage ships, but they were probably huge ships for transport. Strangely, that terrible conflict was not atomic. I saw only a few detonations reminiscent of nuclear explosions, but they were of lesser intensity than other deflagrations that occurred at the same time. The main source of disagreement was complex in nature. It involved a race of evil beings from our galaxy with reptilian traits. In the economy of the universe, reptilians seem to have a special destiny, for they appear at key points in the evolution of races or civilizations, even if their actions are not conscious of this, but directed only towards a selfish goal of control and oppression. From the presentation I have seen, reptilian beings live long lives and in order to thrive they seek to find a suitable ground from which to feed, so reptilians seek to conquer planets and civilizations to exploit and use to accomplish their goals, but in such a way that they don't have to worry too much about them. Being quite technologically advanced, they aim to infiltrate those regions and star systems of the galaxy where advanced civilizations already exist, but not as much as their own. They are not interested in primitive civilizations or civilizations that have just reached the dawn of technological progress, as they aim for those that already have some potential, in order to conquer them relatively easily, but still have something to use from them afterwards, according to their level of development. From this point of view, reptilians can be said to be pragmatic. If the civilization in question were primitive or at too low a level of development, this would imply a consistent effort on their part to shepherd it, where they do not want to work too hard. On the other hand, if they conquered too much too fast, it would exceed their possibilities of covering and control. This is why the evil reptilians show amazing patience, specializing in subversive infiltration actions. They corrupt and conquer an advanced civilization not necessarily by destroying, pillaging and then leaving the planet, but mostly by undermining it, by intrigue and corruption. In other words, in most cases they are not brutal predators, but work at more refined levels, through hybridization and the introduction of low vibrational frequency genes. They know that if they get to corrupt enough of a race's DNA, it will eventually retain their specific imprint and then they will always have a foothold and action in that civilization. The bigger this specific trace imprinted in a race's DNA, the better for the reptilians, because then they will be able to influence it more easily in decisions and actions. Therefore, their plans are less violent, immediate or with large-scale cosmic battles, and more long-term, infiltrating the DNA of some races with their own DNA. In time, they know that this action will corrupt that race, at least to some extent, and that weakness they can then use for their own benefit. In this way, evil reptilians end up corrupting even advanced civilizations in an indirect way. As I said, they always aim to orient themselves towards those civilizations that are not very developed, but which are nevertheless part of cosmic alliances or have entrances to some developed civilizations. By applying the hybridization modality, they simply infiltrate the germs of evil into that civilization or alliance of developed civilizations, placing their hybrids in important positions and thus creating breaches in the security and good understanding in that alliance. It's a very subversive, but effective way of spreading their evil influence throughout the galaxy. This was also the way they acted in the case of Earth. Using infiltration through some of the Galactic Alliance member civilizations, and even a civilization that was descended from the original Sirians, but had settled in a star system other than Sirius A, they transmitted elements of their own DNA into the human population. What surprised me somewhat was that the infiltration was not a mass infiltration, but rather followed a subtle path. I have seen that, through certain hybridization actions, their genes corrupted the DNA of a small number of human beings at first, but that corruption later spread to a large number of beings, taking the form of negative ways of thinking and acting. They manifested themselves mostly through misguided beliefs, which through repetition from generation to generation came to create perverted gaps and connections within human DNA. This subtle way of perversion was later used by humans to achieve onerous goals. So, in ancient times reptilians initially planted a few bad seeds, which then proliferated and developed over time to the point where their influence in human DNA could no longer be denied or annihilated. It is true, however, that this corruption does not occupy a large percentage of the DNA macromolecule, but as far as we have seen it only represents about 2 to 3% or even less, but even so some tendencies, habits and actions, especially in contemporary society, show us what negative effects can occur as a result of the resonances induced by this very dangerous civilization. The corruption and infiltration of reptilians even among relatively advanced alliance civilizations led quite quickly to claims on certain territories both on Earth and in our solar system that they wanted to control. I have seen and understood, in a clever combination of images, that some of the higher beings of those civilizations have begun to manifest certain intentions and tendencies, other than those respecting universal harmony, in moving toward objectives and goals with individual and power-oriented goals. In other words, they began to decline spiritually, because the path of temptation is very winding and treacherous, and the evil reptilians know very well the tricks by which to influence beings and even entire civilizations in this direction. The problem was that those alien beings, representing some alliance civilizations, began to forcibly demarcate some territories of influence, which they took under occupation. Following the outbreak of conflict, the alliance broke up for a time and split into several smaller alliances according to affinities and interests. That was a very turbulent and challenging time for mankind. As far as I have seen, it took over 20,000 years for things to get back to normal and to restore some balance, both in the planet's ecosystem and in the existence of humanity since then. At the same time, the original alliance was rebuilt to some extent. Images showed me condensations of fleets or various snapshots of diplomatic meetings between representatives of civilizations, which varied in number of members. It was the only way I could figure out what actually happened immediately after the conflict. Then, about 70,000 years ago, the Sirians of the Sirius A system decided to strengthen that alliance, of which they were also a part. They did not intervene armed in the great conflict in the alliance, although practically speaking they were the patrons. The Sirians then only played the role of mediators. Being somewhat puzzled by this, I asked why they did not intervene in that conflict, to end it or at least to mitigate it. The man from Apellos explained to me that, on the scale it was, that war between alien civilizations involved not only Earth, but also had as an element of dispute a demarcation of areas of interest in the galaxy, for different forces and groups within it. The situation was tense on several planets, and that's why the Sirians sought to protect as much as possible the galactic sector we were part of. Perhaps if they had actually intervened in the conflict, it would have escalated hostilities and at some point the situation could have become uncontrollable. On the other hand, they wished to leave the course of events and individual choices free, in accordance with cosmic laws and principles, intervening only where the recklessness of some civilizations could bring great destruction or irreparable disruption to the natural course of things and the divinely integrated plans. The Sirians have never wanted to escalate conflicts, even though they could have won them quite easily, thanks to their extraordinary technological advance. They prefer the alternative of peace and evolution, which is in accordance with the laws of universal harmony, and seek to respect as much as possible the free will of the civilizations they come into contact with. Only when they are attacked and have to defend themselves, as I have seen in the great confrontations with the reptilians, do they use their highly advanced combat capabilities. In the terrible alien space war about 100,000 years ago, they limited themselves to supporting the diplomatic path, mediating certain relationships between conflicting extraterrestrial civilizations. As I said, the core of the evil was the influence of the Reptilians. After the end of the conflict, the Sirians wanted a strengthening of the galactic alliance of which they were a part. Their resolve was driven by the need to prevent, in the future and as far as possible, the corruption by reptilian conquest of other civilizations within the grouping of alien civilizations. This had already happened to some extent, and the negative influence of the Reptilians had been felt in quite a few areas on Earth. The strengthening of the Galactic Alliance implied closer cooperation and mutual aid between those civilizations that formed it. It was an eminently beneficial alliance, as I was told there were others in the galaxy and other sectors. The beneficial alliance, made up of Sirians, Pleiadians, Arcturians and dozens of other civilizations, had a counterweight, in the sense that the Reptilians also formed an alliance with several civilizations oriented towards conquering, exploiting and controlling planets or even star systems. This is why the Sirians wanted to increase collaboration between the civilizations within their alliance, in order to bring together more different vibrational frequencies, against the reptilian force and the evil and very subversive alliance they had formed. Therefore, it was important to prevent one of the less developed civilizations of the Galactic Alliance from being attracted or conquered by the Reptilians, which would have repercussions both among the Galactic Alliance and the genetic laboratory on Earth. Further, in Chapter 13 of the book Forgotten Genesis written by Radu Cinamar, we learn that with the invasion of reptilians into our solar system about 100,000 years ago, the positive alien civilizations that watch over our planet, in order to protect the inhabitants of the planet from the influence of reptilians, decided to build pyramids in various locations on Earth, the pyramids having the role of emitting beneficial and elevated energies, to protect human beings on Earth and at the same time to help them evolve further. Also, from the following excerpts from the mentioned book, we will find out why the reptilians were allowed to come to the solar system anyway, even though they could easily have been destroyed by beneficial alien civilizations that are much more technologically evolved than the reptilians. Here's what the book says. The construction of pyramids on our planet began about 100,000 years ago. That context is worth a brief overview, as it provides a broader and more pertinent view of how pyramids were built on Earth, who the real builders were, and the main motivation behind those colossal constructions. I have come to see and understand these things, because I have focused on the construction of the pyramids. I already knew that the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau near Cairo were by no means the first pyramids built on our planet, so I wanted to know what it was that led to the construction, with a science and precision unparalleled today, of these colossal edifices. At first it was suggested to me by images that at some point, building pyramids on Earth became a necessity. I have thus seen the fragmented initiation of such constructions at different points on the globe, and schematic connections between them and outer space. I was seeing certain directions, symbols and geometric shapes that I couldn't understand. Then, in a logical sequence, the images showed the constitution of an extraterrestrial being with reptilian features. It was a quick but complex presentation from several angles, with lots of adjacent data and symbols, which had a great dynamism within the hologram. Then the content of the images changed, showing me brief but accurate snapshots of several types of cosmic craft, which were generally elongated in shape. One of the types, however, had the classic round shape of the UFOs presented in the literature. Then the hologram split, in the sense that the image of the reptilian being appeared in the lower left corner of the hologram, and the rest was filled with the image of a huge fleet of ships similar to the ones mentioned above, plus others much larger in size. The images were very dynamic, zooming in and out depending on the ideas we wanted to emphasize. The fleet's movement was attached to the image of our solar system, which I recognized mainly from the image of Saturn and the red spot on Jupiter. I was thus shown in a simple way, that the reptilians were heading with their cosmic fleet towards our solar system. The feeling and excitement I felt at that visual impact was chilling, because it was not just a simple visualization, but also a connection to the state of the moment, of the context. In the face of the threat, the most important and evolved alien civilizations of the Galactic Alliance, who were watching over our planet, so that the plan for the genetic evolution of the human being on Earth could proceed smoothly, decided to defend our planet and the project they had worked so hard on until then. I was astonished to see from the synthesis of the images, that even in this radical action, the advanced extraterrestrial civilizations that had the responsibility of the laboratory on our planet, acted in such a way that human beings could evolve even under those conditions. For this, the original Sirians decided to introduce advanced technology to Earth to counter the reptilian assault. As I roughly perceived it, those events that I watched in summary on the holographic screen happened 100,000 to 108,000 years ago. At that time, the ENL beings were in full creative bloom, so access to the technology of Sirius and the advanced alien civilizations then inhabiting Earth was easier, due to the fact that the ENL branch already had a refined level of consciousness and understanding. The technology of the Great Resonators referred to the construction of enormous edifices in various points on the globe, which would be like beacons of elevated subtle energy, which had the ability to gradually induce important changes in the DNA of human beings, through its resonance with those energies. At the time I understood and greatly appreciated the idea, but then I wondered, why didn't the Syrians or even the alliance they formed with other advanced alien civilizations ban the reptilians here on Earth, or even in the galaxy, with all the harm they do? I would have thought this wouldn't have been too difficult for them. Then, in a few flashes of very cleverly grouped images I realized that even though the involvement of the evil reptilians was terrible, yet on a global understanding they played their part in all those events. It was thus revealed to me that their intervention was in fact a necessity, because ultimately it led to such a specialization of the DNA of the human being, so hard and close to the physical plane, that it gave the possibility of incarnation on this plane to a large number of beings from the astral plane, who otherwise would not have had the necessary level to be born in higher physical bodies. I understand, therefore, that the plan of creating a human being with a very complex DNA had in mind, among other things, to create greater possibilities for certain souls on the astral plane to evolve through incarnation, because they needed to understand the meaning of their experiences, and to fructify them in accordance with their individual karma. This could only be done by incarnating into physical bodies with very specialized frequencies, that is very concrete, because those souls could not be born otherwise, because of the karmic limitations they had. They could only continue their evolution in this way if they were born in a very concrete body, which would allow them to go through certain existential crises, so that they could understand the need to adjust the way they live their lives. The fact that human DNA was very specialized and separated on many different branches and directions of development and evolution, also contributed to the birth of a diversity of souls and entities on the astral plane, corresponding to a wide range of vibrational frequencies, and that is why humanity began to appear as a multicolored fan of such frequencies and tendencies, which made it to be called a nursery. On the other hand, reptilians could not control the entire population of the planet, but only those beings who resonated with them, who had at least some reptilian influence and energy in their DNA. Some of these influences were harsher, and those beings became their acolytes, others were less harsh, and then there was an intense struggle for the total suborcloning of those beings. In fact, the reptilians wanted to suppress the rest of the population in order to conquer the entire planet. They were technologically advanced enough that they created a lower frequency mental network, a kind of cage that could influence to some extent even beings that didn't resonate with them. This is still true today, with certain corrections. By enabling the introduction of great resonator technology, that is, giant constructions on Earth, the Alliance has given new impetus and concrete help to human beings both, to evolve and to use those edifices for defense purposes. The great resonators are in fact, for the most part, the pyramids and ziggurats that we can admire today in precisely aligned areas on Earth. The creation of these extraordinary constructions was also a further help for the spiritual future of mankind, for after the retreat of Shambhala and the sinking of Atlantis, there had to be centers on the surface of the planet that would sustain at least to some extent the light and spirituality of the past. But the pyramids were built until then, in much older periods of humanity, primarily out of the need to keep in touch at great distances with the gods, that is, with extraterrestrial civilizations that had a decisive role in the evolution of the DNA of the human race on Earth. In the case of such gigantic constructions, this was possible, because in reality the pyramids are very powerful telepathic transmitters of subtle energy and information. Secondly, their construction became necessary in those times, because pyramids constantly create a refinement of the subtle emotional energies of human beings. This was of great help, especially in those times when tensions and wars had reached high levels, due to the influence of evil reptilians. Therefore, the egregore of human beings and their specific mental field had to be supported, and helped to evolve further, and that is why, one of the main methods to achieve this was the introduction of technology and knowledge of the extremely elaborate and difficult construction of pyramids, as great resonators of beneficial energies in the universe. Then from chapter 14 of the book The Forgotten Genesis written by Radu Cinamar, we learn the following things about reptilians that happened about 7,000 years ago. Here's what the book says. Looking very closely and interested in various aspects of the many wars that have been fought, and especially the interventions of reptilians on Earth, I wondered why the pure, original extraterrestrial civilizations, such as the basic Sirian, Pleiadian or Arcturian, which have always been presented in the front line on the holographic screen, as the most important and powerful in the Galactic Alliance, did not shield around the Earth, to protect it from repeated attempts of penetration or influence of reptilians? In a subsequent discussion with the man from Apellos, I understood that since Earth had been chosen to become the breeding site of a nursery for superior DNA, that is, human beings with very complex DNA, they also had to be able to face and solve different kinds of problems, including that of an evil influence. The Alliance believed that at that time, about 7,000 years ago, the DNA of ENK beings was ready to deal with such influences. In other words, the Alliance gave humanity the opportunity to direct its own destiny for the most part, through freely made choices in the issues it faced, which would later be reflected in the DNA, as an added experience and implicitly as a strengthening of itself. This would not have been possible several tens of thousands of years ago, when ENK beings were not yet sufficiently developed at the DNA level, because there was a danger of their total subjugation by the reptilian race, or even of their evolution being blocked. That is why the Alliance intervened and helped humanity until that moment, in order to provide the necessary time for its development and evolution. However, as I said, thousands of years ago the advanced civilizations of the Alliance preferred to let things unfold largely through human choices, even if sometimes they were not good. This was a necessity, because ENK beings needed to wake up and sustain their complex genetics further. What is particularly interesting, as the man from Apellos told me, is that ENK beings had already begun at that time to develop a monotheistic spiritual knowledge, that is, they were looking for an even more hidden root for everything that existed, beyond the many gods and goddesses of the Egyptian pantheon. This was further evidence of the maturation of their DNA and the line of evolution they followed. Then, also from the book The Forgotten Genesis, we learn what events happened on Earth about 4,800 years ago BC, when again reptilians were involved. Here's what the book says. Then the images jumped rather quickly to another historical reality, which was, as far as I have calculated, around 4,800 BC. I have seen that among some of the civilizations that supported that process of transmitting the ancient scientific and spiritual knowledge dowry, that helped form powerful centers of spirituality on Earth, certain dissensions began to arise. These turned into a fairly strong, but short-lived war. Humans were also involved, and the end result led to a reorganization of the Alliance, so that many of the initiatory centers on the planet came under the tutelage of civilizations, other than the original ones. It also involved changing customs, names of deities, and even elements of knowledge. Some mutations have also occurred in people's religions. Basically, and as far as I could tell, the reason for the conflict, which this time was less intense than the one about 100,000 years ago, had the same root, the negative influence of reptilians. The problem was that some of the alien gods of antiquity lived in areas of the galaxy that had begun to be shadowed by the presence and nefarious influence of reptilians. Therefore, it was difficult and even dangerous to allow such a negative infusion of conception, and even genetic modification into human DNA, if the pantheon of Egyptian gods remained unchanged. The aspect was quite delicate, as all human civilizations that have passed over time, especially after 30,000 BC, received the endorsement of those alien gods who contributed to the formation of spiritual centers on Earth, to the construction of pyramids, as well as other priestly edifices. However, due to reptilian influences that slowly spread even among some of the fairly advanced alien civilizations, several thousand years ago, the Galactic Alliance had to alter the pantheon, with some gods being replaced by others from other Alliance civilizations. However, this change did not sit well with some of the ENK beings, who wanted to remain loyal to the old gods. Thus, tensions began to arise between the human populations, which later spread to some of the alien civilizations in the Alliance.